It's Plato's fault. He started it, all this absurd business of truth and beauty. I'm going to give you a deliciously purple passage to start with. There we are in the symposium, Apollodorus narrating Aristodemus' account of Socrates' dinner party recollections of Diotima's instructions about love. Try to pay attention to me as best you can, says Diotima, according to Socrates, according to Aristodemus, according to Apollodorus, according to me. You see, the man who has been thus far guided in matters of love, who has beheld beautiful things in the right order and correctly, is coming now to the goal of loving. All of a sudden, he will catch sight of something wonderfully beautiful in its nature. That, Socrates, is the reason for all his labors. First, it always is, and neither comes to be nor passes away, neither waxes nor wanes. Second, it is not beautiful in this way and ugly in that way, nor beautiful at one time and ugly at another, nor is it beautiful here and ugly there, as it would be if it were beautiful for some people but ugly for others. Nor will the beautiful appear to him in the guise of a face or hands or anything else that belongs to a body. It will not appear to him as one idea or one kind of knowledge. It is not anywhere in another thing, as in an animal or in earth or even in heaven, or in anything else but itself, by itself, with itself. It is always one in form, and all the other beautiful things share in that, in such a way that when those other things come to be and pass away, this does not become in the least bit smaller or greater, nor suffer any change. From beautiful bodies to beautiful customs, from beautiful customs to learning beautiful things, and from these lessons one arrives at the learning of this very beauty, so that in the end one comes to know just what it is to be beautiful. There, if anywhere, a person should live his life beholding that beauty. If you once see that, it won't occur to you to measure beauty by gold or clothing or beautiful boys and youth. If someone got to see the beautiful itself, absolute, pure, unmixed, not polluted by human flesh or colors or any other great nonsense of mortality, but if one could see the divine beauty itself in its one form, do you think it would be a poor life for a human being to live to live there, to look there and behold it, and to be with it? Or haven't you remembered that in that life alone, where one looks at beauty in the only way that beauty can be seen, only then will it become possible to give birth not to images of virtue, because one is in touch with no mere images, but to true virtue, for one is in touch with true beauty. Absolute beauty indeed, and with a promise of virtue to boot. We can't speak of truth, it seems, without goodness being dragged into it, and we can't speak of beauty without bringing in love. But he couldn't just leave it there, old Plato. No, he had to go on and compound matters in an allegory of the soul from the Phaedrus. This is a shorter purple passage. The place beyond heaven. None of our earthly poets has ever sung or ever will sing its praises enough. Still, this is the way it is. Risky as it may be, you see, I attempt to speak the truth, especially since the truth is my subject. What is in this place is without color, without shape, without solidity, a being that really is what it is, the subject of all true knowledge, visible only to intelligence. A mind is nourished by intelligence and pure knowledge, delights at last to be seeing what is real and watching what is true, feeding on all this and feeling wonderful. On the way around, it has a view of justice as it is, a view of self-control. It has a view of knowledge, not the knowledge that is close to change, that becomes different as it knows the different things which consider the real down here. No, it is knowledge of what really is what it is. Here again we have beauty and truth, not just the true beauty, but all the other real truths are themselves beautiful. So, real reality has a true beauty, and beauty itself is really real. Except, none of this seems to have anything to do with us. As Plato himself fully recognizes, in the Parmenides most explicitly. We've saved the reality of beauty and the beauty of reality by casting them out of the world altogether. They may be, but this form of really, real, truly true being so far transcends any experience that it is for us nothing. At least that is the danger, and it's a danger that Plato himself recognizes. And Plato sees too, all too well, that in our actual lives, beauty is no guide to truth, and that the truth is sometimes hard and sometimes ugly. So to the first, that beauty is no guide to truth. Ordinarily, the beauty of gold or clothing or attractive youths strikes us out of our senses in the symposium. It stupefies us rather than enlightening us. The Phaedrus has a whole litany of ridiculous things people do when smitten by the beauty of the beloved. This is not truth, it's lust. And Plato knows full well that our sense of what is beautiful may well tell us nothing more than what would satisfy the desires we already have. So the Republic tells us, "Isn't this the way lovers of boys behave to fine and beautiful youths? You praise the snub-nosed one as cute, the hook-nosed one you say is regal. One in between is well-proportioned. Dark ones look manly. The pale ones are children of the gods. As for the honey-colored boy, what do you think this very term is but a euphemism for a lover who found it, coined by a lover who found it easy to tolerate sallowness, provided it was accompanied by the bloom of youth?" The experience of beauty is pleasant, and pleasure lies. Each pleasure and each pain are a rivet, says the Phaedo, nailing the soul more firmly to the body, in particular, making the soul believe the truth is what the body says it is. The body says pleasure is good, and the experience of pleasure makes us believe it. Pleasure positively misleads us. It's a kind of witchcraft in the Phaedo, or in the Republic. Those who change their mind because they're under the spell of pleasure and fear are victims of a kind of magic. Which magic? The magic of the compelling pictures that art and poetry draw. That is why poets, mere imitators at 3 removes from reality, have to be banished from Callipolis. And of course, as Plato often reminds us, Socrates himself is famously ugly. So beauty is no guide to truth. There is beauty without truth, and truth, if we may call a person true, without beauty. Which brings us to our second claim, or second part of it, the hard truth. Plato knows that not everything that is the case is thereby fine and fair. He was not a fantasist, and he was not Nietzsche. Plato lived the first 30 years of his life through an endless, pitiless war that Athens was losing. When they finally lost, the city itself saw the brutal reign of a pro-Spartan oligarchy, including the killing of 5% of the population of Athens. Critias, a leader of the 30, was Plato's uncle or maternal cousin. Plato himself was about 20 at the time. The oligarchy lasted only 8 months, but in a final betrayal, it was the restored democracy it was in the restored democracy that his admired mentor, then 70 years old, was judicially murdered by a jury of his peers, of Plato's peers, his family, his allies and friends, who voted to execute Socrates for the non-capital offense of impiety and the non-existent offense of corrupting the youth. This was not something to affirm, for the sake of affirming everything that came after, including himself. It was a horrible wrong, rendered more awful by the inability of those who did it to see it as wrong. There's nothing beautiful or good in the execution of Socrates, and everything Plato wrote is another reminder to his contemporaries that this is, in fact, what really happened, and that it really was that bad. So Plato knows that facts can be ugly and truths can be hard. And he certainly didn't need any Johnny-come-lately Germans to point out that standards of beauty vary across cultures. He had Herodotus. In fact, not just human physical attractiveness, but judgments of what deeds are fine, noble, fair, and just, varied in different places, as Herodotus told us. It's the fineness of deeds and of persons, not their bodies, that is at stake in the argument from cultural variability, as any visiting sophist would have happily explained for a fee. Assuming Plato recognizes all of this, assuming, that is, that Plato isn't stupid, what is the relationship between truth and beauty, and why does it matter, perhaps even morally? If there is anything that Plato is getting at in his circling and recircling around truth, love, beauty, and the good, what could it possibly be? So I've got a suggestion of two insights that Plato is has perhaps got hold of, is trying to get at. The first is that beauty is a kind of goodness that is good for nothing. There is no need for beauty. It serves no purpose. Because of this, if it is good at all, it is good for its own sake. It's a kind of goodness that does not wait attendance upon our pre-given aims and wishes. I don't mean to account with this for every instance of any person ever saying that's beautiful, nor did Plato. All this claim needs is that there is this kind of beauty, this good-for-nothing beauty. If such beauty is possible at all, it is this sort of beauty that can lay claim to being real beauty. It can lay such claim because this sort of autonomous goodness is the unusual sort, the inexplicable sort, the sort which requires a separate term to distinguish it from the experience of gratification, satiation, suitability, usefulness, and so on. Such good-for-nothing beauty is real beauty because only this is something genuinely distinct from the other forms of dependent or conditional goodness. And then the second claim related to this is that our responsiveness to beauty is a capacity to love non-instrumentally. This is, in a way, only the flip side of the first claim, but it's important to turn it around in this way. That we can experience beauty says something about us. We are capable of recognizing as good something that is not just good at serving our purposes. Our experiences of beauty prove this capacity to recognize real goodness when confronted with it, to find something good because it is good. Recognition of real beauty is thus the proof of the possibility of acquaintance with genuine goodness. Again, genuine because it does not reduce to useful, desired, or desired for some pre-given end. Recognition of real beauty proves that we can be pulled out of ourselves, out of our absorption in our everyday projects and priorities, our navel-gazing concerns and cares. The attractive force that beauty exerts on us shows that we can come to care where before we were indifferent or oblivious. None of this, of course, means that we will, in fact, do any such thing. But if we want to find the strange and impossible connection between beauty and goodness, what we might call moral goodness or unconditional goodness, or the ethical importance of truth, I think somewhere in here is where we should start looking. So when Plato claims that truth is beautiful, this has nothing to do with the clearly silly claim that each and every true statement is beautiful or refers to something beautiful. His claim is first of all restricted to a specific portion of what might be called true, to justice and self-control, equality and double, bigger and smaller, the same and different, and such like. His primary interest is in maintaining that there is some such truth or reality. There is a reality that is not constructed by us and not answerable to our convenience, itself by itself, always the self-same. There is a reality that is as it is, quite regardless of purposes we may happen to have, quite regardless of whether its being so happens to serve what we take to be our interests. If such reality appears good to us, it will be in virtue of its being intelligible to us. in virtue of its well-relatedness, its mutual coherence, no truth doing violence to any other, is a way that is put in the Republic. So I have in mind here a contrast case with quite a different outlook coming from Abhidharma Buddhism, where it's equally the case that attention to an impersonal reality should reorient us ethically. But it insists that this impersonal reality that we look at, that we attend to, is just the recognition, really is just one damn thing after the other. There is nothing more to it than that, and that's what we're meant to recognize. There's nothing in it to excite wonder, nothing beautiful, and so crucially, nothing lovable about it. Okay? For Plato, by contrast, it's important that our experience of this reality is a recognition of something that is good so, just as it is, because it is, and for no further reason. Reality is a cosmos, which contains within it a notion of beauty. And in this respect, it inspires admiration and delight. Recall yesterday the connection between the one thing that Nietzsche and Plato may have in common is this recognition of joy. This in turn inspires emulation of a sort, a longing to be like that, perhaps a longing to live up to something, to an unconditional kind of goodness that does no harm. It is a feeling of wonder and beauty that is our recognition of what is true in this sense. This sense of beauty, of the beauty of reality, is an aspiration and, in a way, a hope. It's a promise that the irredeemable ugliness of the world, the incomprehensible ugliness of people's behavior towards one another, is not all there is. That life is not a relentless game of vainly trying to measure up misery against pleasure and make sure that one comes out on the right side of that bargain. Reality is larger and finer than any local good and bad, and it offers at least the prospect of maintaining that the powerful are not right just because they've won. And so insisting on the beauty of this truth is to insist that it's possible for us to know this reality, to feel it in our bones, and to recognize it as valuable quite independently of whether it serves our interests. We are such as to be able to be responsive to how things are, and to appreciate their independence of our will. We can discern relations of orderliness, appropriateness, fittingness, measure, all those terms that David disprefers in contrast to not the dislocated, at any rate. Such knowledge is useless in just the same way, and the independent goodness of these speaks to us in the language of beauty. Such knowledge is useless in just the same way that beauty is. It is not for the sake of anything else. It is not good because it is useful in getting us something else we want, or because of any external benefit or prestige. Such orientation to reality resists instrumentalization, and yet to exercise it gives us practice in selflessness and care, for it demands our attention to something independent of us, or of me in each case. The Philebus calls this, or in the Philebus, Socrates calls this a capacity of the soul to love truth and do everything for its sake. And so we're back with love. It is, in the end, impossible to discuss beauty without love and to discuss truth without goodness. More surprising, perhaps, is Plato's further insight that it's equally impossible to discuss beauty without goodness or truth without love.
Thank you, Amber. That was enormously helpful. I was trying to look at what I suppose were bad translations of Plato and figure out what in the world he could be trying to tell us. And that That was extremely helpful. Elida, could you wait for the mic, please?
Thank you so much, Amber. You have really convinced me now that the words beauty and truth should be put together. I was very skeptical about this. And how have you convinced me? You have convinced me by placing it into a row with other terms. You went from truth to goodness and from beauty to love. And I think these are the 4 terms that create totally new constellations, which are also very pertinent to issues that we are discussing today. So if we go from truth to love, we could easily connect it also through the concept of the pedagogical eros. Now, eros is needed in order to love truth, otherwise we will never get into contact. Now, for the older teachers, it was, of course, in Greece, it was the homoerotic youth that was part of this game. But in the general sense, it is we have to love somebody in order to love the truth that this person is also uttering. Right now, in order to make the very insensual, immaterial truth attractive, you need a body to stand in, I mean, as a mediator to access truth. And this now has become such an issue through the defamation of the pedagogical eros in the field of pedagogy. It had been inspired very much by this notion, and now even a person like Hartmut von Hentig has been excommunicated from this society of pedagogues because he was adhering to this concept of pedagogical eros, which had been, of course, also become problematic through the whole abuse concept. Now, I think this is something that immediately speaks to us today and helps us to explain this long, long history and also of what we are losing by excommunicating a person like him from this, and how much of this do we need to salvage and how careful do we have to be when using these things, because there is some use to it after all.
Thank you. Thank you. That's terrific intervention, and it reminds me of another piece of the puzzle that I'd wanted to get to. We are particulars, and we only have particular experiences of the world, in some sense. We may have available to us the capacity to recognize structure in the world, and that may itself be something intelligible, not physical, but we can only do that with the capacities that we have. One of the things that I think is absolutely crucial to Plato's treatment of it is that he, while recognizing the necessity of engaging with particulars, particular persons, and even particular persons where they are right at this moment. We have, you might say that's why we have the dialogue form, and we have instances of it portrayed in the dialogue form. He also insists that there is a terrible danger in getting caught up in the particular, at mistaking the beauty that we see for something specific to the particular person in whom we see the beauty. So there's so many funny things in the symposium, but one of the funny things about the symposium is it's narrated, well, one of those internet narrators is Aristodemus, and Aristodemus is in love with Socrates. He has been captured, so to speak. But Aristodemus can't tell the difference between Socrates, the particular person who has this history and so on, and the thing that makes Socrates so beautiful, which is the truth that he insists on being attentive to, right? Alcibiades, in the same dialogue, kind of gets it and kind of doesn't. And so we get this image of the Silenus, right, this statue that's ugly on the outside, The particulars of Socrates are indeed ugly, but there's what's on the inside, and what's on the inside is only Socrates' attentiveness to and love for and valuing of what's really good, right? So there's a criticism that's sometimes made, fairly or not, it's a longer discussion, about Plato on love, that he somehow forgets the particular person. And I think in a way that that's right. I don't know that it's a criticism if it's understood correctly. But I think that what's going on is this recognition that there's a real danger in being lost in the particular, of getting lost in the particular because of the beauty it has, rather than following, as Diotima has told us we ought to, the beauty itself. The beautiful youth reminds us of, by manifesting, reminds us of what real beauty is. And real beauty isn't the beautiful body, right? So if somebody in their practice of pedagogical eros has themselves made that error, it is an error, right? And it should be recognized as an error. And it's an error that is inherent in the very idea that love of beauty is this attraction to truth, and that we do this sort of mutually, and one that Plato recognizes. If there's a way out of, what I think there can be is a way of distinguishing between the misguided eros that gets lost in the particular and the love of the particular, as if that's the beautiful thing.
Philip Kitcher is next.
So thank you very much. I think that's a wonderfully elegant way of trying to make sense of all sorts of themes in Plato. But there's a worry, and you just alluded to it.
Yeah.
We seem to lose the individual. We seem to lose the people with whom we live and move and have our being. So Plato's move is, of course, to distance the world in which truth and beauty and goodness truly lie from the world of everyday experience. And when we think of the moral good as something to which we ought to respond, that affects the way in which we see our dealings with other people. And this is, of course, the Bernard Williams criticism that I think you had at the back of your mind. So now I'm in relationship with other people in this world of experience, this very imperfect, often ugly world. And I strive to do things for those people. And if I'm following Plato, that's because, not because of them, but because I see in them, or I apprehend somehow in them, something of this remote, more fundamental world. And I want to say about that there's something deeply inhumane about it. That if I'm trying to help somebody whom I don't know, or if I'm responding to somebody who's a friend, or to my wife, that I shouldn't be doing it because that is in accordance with the good. It's a more direct connection to them as human beings, and indeed as particular human beings. And that my love, my caring, anything that the moral quality of my actions is this worldly. I think there's a parallel here between the Platonic view and many sophisticated religious views, which which see our dealings with other human beings as somehow mediated by the deity, the goodness of the deity, and so forth. And from the kind of humanism that I have, that just feels wrong. That it's all about us. It's all, and there's a protest of the sort that Williams makes. That the man standing watching various people having trouble in the water, who says, "Well, that one is my wife. I have a duty to my wife. Has had one thought too many." Right? No. It's not, you don't even, even if he just says, oh, that's my wife, I should save her. That's one thought too many. You should just do it because it's her. Anyway, that's the obvious objection.
Yep.
And
Yep.
I'd like to
Good.
hear sort of how you get Plato off the hook.
Good, thank you. So it is all about us. Who are we? What are we? Right? So let it be all about us. We are creatures to whom experience comes according to the concepts and categories in which we experience the world. We are that much, okay? So, with that said, what I think is misplaced about the Williams' way of putting the objection, and sort of the feeling that that Plato's taking something away from us, taking away the particular, is this language of intermediary, right? That, well, there's me and there's you. Oh, and there's this thing between us. Call it the good itself, or call it God. But of course, it's up there. So my interest goes up here and then ricochets down to you, right? That's the picture that's drawn, and naturally that feels wrong because a relationship between two persons of recognition has got to be a recognition of the particular. So what are we doing when we recognize persons, right? This recognition is not independent of how we see the world, and let me try to put it a different way. It's recognition of the good itself and care for the good itself that enables you to show up as a person vulnerable to harm and someone with whom I might relate in an attitude of care, right? So if I don't have some sense of an independent good, if that's the way to put it, I might relate to you as an individual so far as it tickles my fancy, so far as it amuses me to do so, right? I'm seeing you as you relate to whatever aims and projects and so on that I have. But to see you as an independent person, so to speak, a person independent of my will or wishes or whatever, and to appreciate that, is something that becomes apparent to us and apparent to us as valuable in virtue of our recognition of sort of truth, that there is reality that's not subject to our will. There's a goodness that isn't just answering to my concerns. Let me try to put this one more way. How we see the world, whether we recognize any kind of goodness in it, affects all of our relations to others. It affects what we see when we see another person, right? And that's the way to think about the role of the good here. I don't first think about the good and then deduce from that in some kind of logical syllogism that the right thing to do here is to save someone, right? It's because I see the world as a possible space for goodness that I see that there's a person here who needs help and see that as having a claim on me. That's the way it works.
So, just so that you'll know, and my function as a policewoman here, we have 20 minutes in chronological order. Herr Farchester, Eva Illouz, David Schulman, Stephen Holmes, Rainey Daston, and Wendy Doniger on my list. And with that, unfortunately, I'm closing the list. So may I ask you all to keep your remarks on the shorter side? and your answers, Amber. I'm sorry.
You all definitely
Well,
included
yeah,
me.
as much as I'd like to hear them.
In my reading of Plato, the main issue in the Diotima speech is the unity of desire. Yes, there's different objects, there's different levels, but basically it's one force, so to speak. It's maybe a little bit of Freudian interpretation. So I would say that is this concept of desire that is, and I would translate eros more as desire, not so much as love. This concept of desire that is making the convergence of beauty and truth obvious. And if I may point to the Indian tradition just shortly, the classical concept of Satchitananda is not really involving beauty so much. But if you go to the Bhakti tradition or to the Baul songs and so on, where the desire for the absolute God, good for God and so on, or the longing is central, then again you have beauty involved. So I would say that this converging of beauty and truth is really depending on whether you consider our relation to the world as basically one of something like desire or longing.
Okay, thank you. The Greek terms here are do not map one-to-one with the English or the German, likely not the French either. So eros indeed has a desiderative element in it. There is another Greek word for love. It is philia. Philia does not have the same either the same sensual element or the same element of a desire to grasp. There's something grasping in eros. But there's also epithymia, and I would use epithymia for desires of the kind that we usually, in English, often desires. We have a desire for this or that, it's indiscriminate what it's for. That would be more epithymia. There's also belesis. So there are lots of desiring words in Greek, and I wouldn't want eros to be just desire. It's important that it's love. It's important that it's the kind of thing we feel for another person, and that when we want to be with them all the time, when we feel that they are irreplaceable. So that's the question of translation, sort of both agreeing, but also I want to refine it a bit. The unity of desire, I think I would agree with you about that's what's going on in the symposium. What I think is particularly interesting and relevant for the case is the role that unity plays. Why is unity something desirable to have or to be? And this is related to beauty, because unity as a desideratum is well, it's a criterion of truth, but it's also an aspect of beauty. I have nothing further to say about the Bhakti tradition, but that yes, it's that beauty comes into it when love comes into it. I think that's right. That this is a feeling of attraction. It's that philia doesn't have. That there are other kinds of things we call love don't have. Yeah.
Eva Iluz. Here, Cass, wait for the mic, please.
Thank you very much, Amber. You made Plato enormously compelling to someone who is not a philosopher and doesn't know Plato very well. Therefore, my question should be really taken as a question of a non-specialist and a non-philosopher. It's a really naive question. So, for one, it seems to me that beauty and truth should really, really be separate. So, beauty, for me, or our reaction to beauty, because we can never talk about beauty without our reaction to it or our capacity to identify it. I would view beauty in the way that cognitive psychologists would view it, that is, as a reflex response to pattern and to symmetry. And for sure, beauty is something that exists on the level of phenomenal reality, and it seems to me that this is also, in a way, at least part of Plato relates to beauty in that way. Truth, on the other hand, makes hardly any sense if it's not about looking for something that is beyond or beneath phenomenal reality. So they seem to be totally separate, and in that sense, for me, the Christian tradition makes a lot of sense, which would want to separate these two things. So that would be just one question remark. The second is that my understanding of, but I think you proved my understanding wrong, of the ladder of love was that, in a way, beauty is inferior to truth in that process of going up the ladder of love. Whereas I think in your talk you very usefully put them in fact on the same plane, or viewed them as resonating or echoing with each other. So you turned around the hierarchical model of beauty and truth, which I took to be at the center of the ladder of love. So I was wondering, what was your take about this? So, and to conclude, I would say that for me, what activates both, what is common, if I had to say after I said that they should be very much separate, truth and beauty, I would say that what is, however, common to both of them, beauty and truth, is that they both activate and foreclose our desire, either to knowledge or to possess someone. And because of that foreclosure that is contained in it, I wonder if we should not, in fact, reject them, both beauty and truth. Reject them, both beauty and truth.
Okay, thank you. I will try to be brief. So at first I naturally, right, as a good Platonist representing Plato, I want to resist, the cognitive science take. But then I thought, actually, no, I don't think he needs to, right? It's a reflex response to pattern. Yes, and Plato's point is there's intelligible pattern in intelligible reality, right? So it's not that these have nothing to do with each other. And that, you might doubt the claim, but in terms of reading what he does when he talks about why is he so keen on mathematics? What's so great about that, right? Why is this the thing that's going to give us the key to understanding reality? Because it just is pattern. It is pattern. It's pattern without the sensual bits. So I think in that way, they don't have anything to do with each other. You say what's common is that they both activate and foreclose desire, and I'm not sure I know exactly what that means, but if what you mean is it's an ever-receding goal, again, I think that Plato would agree, but thinks that that's what's good about it, because it can act as this regulative and indeed unifying kind of principle. Hierarchy between beauty and truth. Yes, I think that I am trying to do what, I do read the passage as you suggest, where there isn't a preference for truth over beauty. And I in fact had, as you, read it otherwise before. But I think that there is goodness for Plato. If we're going to talk about a hierarchy, there's goodness, and this can be studied in its several aspects and guises, and beauty and truth are both guises of the good.
David Schulman.
So I wanted to say something about the purple prose, because actually I don't think it's purple. There's a kind of tension, I think, in reading Plato. We know this. He's suspicious of poets, right, and artists, and people who are supposedly poor souls condemned to imitate, and so on. But actually, he was a great poet. And anybody who, I think the real problem is that we may not read Plato in Greek. If you read Plato in Greek, then there's a certain drift towards abstraction, a kind of raw abstraction, you might say, that we have in English or German or French that is not there in the Greek, I believe. I think you might in fact say, or in fact I would want to say, that the notions of beauty and goodness that we're talking about, they're embodied in the prose that Plato writes, and it's a highly sensual prose. And in fact, even the description that he gives of this kind of ultimate beauty, goodness in its apparent abstraction is a sensuous, very Greek Mediterranean kind of thing. It's there in the language itself. And in that sense, the kind of strain that we're feeling in trying to figure out, what to do about one's wife if she happens to be drowning, that doesn't exist, actually. It doesn't exist because the whole drive and the force of the language shows you, in fact, that you're a human being living in a sensual world and driven by sensual notions that, in fact, can become abstract, but are not in themselves abstract in the way that they might sound to us.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. I agree. And we might say that this passage is an instantiation of the thing it's talking about. It is using this beauty to help us understand truth. And I absolutely agree with you that the reality isn't somewhere out there as opposed to here, right? It's here.
Stephen Holmes.
Yeah, thanks, Amber. Just to underline Philip's point that loving beauty in someone as opposed to loving them is treating them as a träger, as a bearer of something, and there's something that's weird about doing that. But I really want to ask you about value pluralism, which is something that's come up often here, truthful beauties and beautiful truth and moral truths and truthful morality and so on. Because you make you use value pluralism by distinguishing clearly between the useful and the beautiful. You say these are very different. On the other hand, you want to you or Plato or you're to the extent that you're agreeing with Plato and you seem to defend him. And I'm focused here on love and beauty. So Montaigne, I think it's Montaigne, who says, my enemy, he has beautiful hair. So you can admire the beauty of someone you don't like. And closer to us, we know, we have colleagues, we don't like them, they can say things that are true. They can even say things that are true in an ugly way, which repel us, but they're still true. And we can still agree with them. So I think there's some way in which in all of our discussion here, this sense that of the plurality of values, including truth and beauty and morality, comes up into conflict, maybe not unresolvable, and it doesn't mean that the pluralistic position is the correct one, but there has to be a way of thinking about the at least partial validity of a view of values as being plural, and trying to combine them the way Plato does, or my friend David does too.
Okay, thank you.
You can just give it to Rainey.
First, neither I nor Plato ever promised me for Plato to accommodate every instance of anybody ever saying of something, this is beautiful. Right? There's lots of times we find lots of things beautiful, and it's very interested. Right? We want something. We anticipate getting pleasure from it. Right? Also, there's nothing at all impossible on this account of there being admirable qualities in people who we don't like. That's, I don't think there's anything in here that suggests that couldn't be the case. I do want to take up, because it's a real problem, it comes up over and over again, this idea of treating someone as a bearer of traits. So first of all, fundamentally, that's not Plato's metaphysics. That's Aristotle's metaphysics. Persons aren't trait bearers. Substances aren't trait bearers. This isn't his reality. So that's just the first fundamental thing, and that's a much larger discussion. But it's a suggestion to try to loosen up this sort of default way of supposing Plato must be looking at it. So if I how to put it? When I appreciate your beauty, the beauty in you, it's the beauty in you. It's this here, this particular, that I am appreciating, right? What I called getting lost in the particular is supposing that there's somehow, supposing that what we need therefore to do, or ought therefore to do, is to become attached to all kinds of incidental or accidental aspects that aren't the source, if you like, of the admiration. But I think the, interest of time, I want to hear the other questions. People aren't trait bearers. That's the wrong metaphysics for the whole picture.
Randy Daston.
Does beauty make us stupid? In asking this question, I'm ventriloquizing Descartes, who says, like Aristotle, little wonder is great, it sparks inquiry, but dazzling wonder paralyzes us. And Plato, and you presented him beautifully, is full of the language of bedazzlement and dazzling wonder. Is this the end of inquiry? Even the part which had the most moral oomph, namely that it wrenches us out of our instrumental thinking. Instrumental thinking is the tracing of causes and effects. Even that perhaps anesthetizes the search for knowledge.
Yes, experiences of beauty can be dazzling. They can be overwhelming, and Plato's full of that kind of language. Whether it's the allegory of the cave when you come out of the sunlight, and, right? It's overwhelming. By instrumental thinking, I meant not just cause and effect, but means to an end that is already given and is independent. And it's given independently of what turns out to be true or good. If tracing causes and effects is a way of what Plato calls giving an account or an explanation, then he thinks that this experience of bedazzlement, of wonder, and it was he, not Aristotle, who says that's where philosophy begins. Well, they both said, but that this experience of wonder is something that will entice us to try, to make the effort to explain, right? We have something there to explain or to be explained, I think. So in actual terms, he thinks this experience of bedazzlement or wonder, it is temporary. We don't just stay permanently locked in awe. But it's also crucial to have that moment because it shows us, it inspires in us the desire to understand what it is that just happened.
So we can't have both simultaneously. Permanent wonder.
I think that's right. I think that's right. I think that's right. If wonderment isn't asking a question, but is being awestruck.
Wendy Doniger, last question.
I'd just like to mediate a little bit between Amber so brilliantly channeling Plato and Philip Kitcher channeling Bernard Williams, and add my 2 cents here to bring in David Shulman. When you're talking about beauty and love, and you pointed out correctly, of course, there's so many different words for love in Greek. There are also many words for love in English, and there are many different meanings of the word love in English. And I was on Kitcher-Williams's side in feeling that Plato is inadequate in telling you what to do when your wife is drowning. But I thought that Plato was more useful in understanding what David Shulman was talking about last night when he was talking about the beauty and the goodness in standing up to an evil enemy and defending a defenseless person. So that for that situation, where some of us were arguing about whether the words beauty and goodness were exactly what we meant there, I think Plato is very helpful in saying you don't defend the Palestinian shepherd because you like him or because the landscape of the Palestinian hills is so beautiful, but because of the good, which is beautiful. So I felt that Plato was very useful in helping me to understand what David was getting at, but pretty useless in deciding whether or not I was going to save my wife from drowning.
Thank you, thank you. So absolutely that the connection between the talk that we had last night and Plato's outlook. So I think it's the Williams folk that have the problem in thinking that there's a decision to be made here. Plato doesn't make that mistake. He doesn't think that you see someone drowning and wonder what to do, right? That's the whole point, is that you have a comprehensive way of looking at reality so that this shows up as an opportunity to help, right? This is, somebody's drowning, right? You don't think, oh, let's see, I'm wearing my best clothes and I'm late for work because I've got an interview, but they really look like they're in trouble, right? No, the whole point of Plato's aiming at psychological unity is this isn't a deliberation, this isn't a question, this is immediate responsiveness. And so I just don't see that he has that problem, actually. Oh, about whether or not it's your wife? No. No, I mean, you say, I mean, and in terms of deciding between, she says, there's several people drowning, who should I save? I save the person I can save. I don't swim past the stranger to get to my wife. Right? It depends, right? It depends. The other thing is, we're horribly fallible. We're horribly fallible about these judgments. And this is the other thing that I think Plato recognizes, that in this messy complexity of, right, so I introduced new complexity that Bernard Williams doesn't have in his example, right? We make split-second judgments about what can I do? Am I a strong swimmer or not, right? Is this person so far away that I can't actually get to them, even though, right? It's my child, right? Does that even make a difference? These are messy, messy things that don't even look remotely like decisions. Yeah.
Will you join me in thanking Amber for a wonderful paper?